The article that I am going to talk about is called Flipping Lessons in a Multi-Sectional Spanish Course, Implications for Assigning Explicit Grammar Instruction Outside of the Classroom. The authors are Kara Moransky and Frederick Kim, and the journal would be the Modern Language Journal in 2016. So, some of the key terms and concepts that we will see in this article are inverted classroom, flipped instruction, active learning, explicit instruction, and social cultural theories. So, one of the main things that you will see in this presentation is inverted classroom, and I want to explain a little bit about inverted classroom so you have an idea of what it is if you don't know. So you have in this image you have the traditional classroom, and then you have the flipped or the inverted classroom. So the traditional is you have the lecture, the professor gives you the lecture about the content of the class, and then from that lecture, students have homework activities that they take home. Whereas in inverted classroom, the lecture is as homework, so students prepare themselves and learn the concepts and or the content of the class before going to class, and then once they're in class they do activities about what they learned. Berrickman and Sams in 2014 said that inverted class is direct instruction, which is often referred to as lecture, though it is not necessarily the same thing. It is not conducted in large groups. Okay, so inverted classrooms give the opportunity to the class to spend less time doing explicit context instruction and have more time using second language meaningfully in class. And also doing interactive application activities. So, inverted class would be an explicit instruction. We have Norris and Ortega telling us that if rule explanation compromises part of the instruction, or if learners are directly asked to attend to particular forms and try to arrive at metalinguistic definitions of their own. Okay, so we saw Ortega in class. So this is really nice to read about. And then Ota in 2005 said that this use of explicit instruction follows tenets of social cultural theories of language learning, as the teaching of explicit stimuli can serve as scaffolds upon which learners could construct new knowledge. The participants that were used in this study were learners and instructors. So the learners are 14 sections of intermediate Spanish in their third semester from a private university in the northeastern United States, and they were voluntaries. Um, there were 200 from those 14 sections. There were 218 students, but only 213 participated with on everything. Then there were 7 instructors that had to be native speakers, Spanish native speakers, or native like, and both had to be familiar with either inverted class or in class participational. lesson designs. And there were 3 males and 4 females. For the learners, as you can see in table 1, it was almost the same number of males and females. The majority of the students were from arts and sciences, but there was also business, nursing, and others. And half half of the students expected an A plus or an A. So the cell lessons components were explicit grammar explanation, in-class lesson, and extension activities. And all these 3 things were used in the class depending on which group you would be assigned, which I'm going to talk about further on. What students were learning is the non-adjunctive Spanish se. Okay, so it could be passive se lesson or impersonal se lesson. So in the passive se lesson, they had to write an original recipe. Okay, and then for the impersonal se lesson, they would have to describe common behaviors of students at the university. For the passive se lesson, the students would have to use transitive verbs that include a semantic pageant. So, as you can see in the example, the agent would be Pedro, okay, the person, and then the pageant would be the los platos or the plates. Okay, and then for the impersonal se is intransitive verbs that did not include semantic pageant. Okay, so they didn't have the plates, for example. Okay, so 2 examples. One for the first one, the passive se, would be se lavaron los platos, which would be the dishes were washed. Okay, and then for the impersonal se lesson would be se baila. One dances or people dance. So the participants were divided in 2 groups. Okay, one group would be an inverted classroom condition, and the second would be in-class presentational condition. Okay, so for the inverted classroom condition, they would have all the grammar explanations as homework. Okay, they had to complete it before class. Okay, and then for the in-class presentational, they would see the same grammatical explanations but during the whole class discussion. Okay, and there were 100 students in the inverted class with 4 instructors, and then there were 118 students in the in-class presentational and 3 instructors. As you can see in this figure, you can see how the lessons were. Okay, so for the inverted class, they would have homework. Okay, as homework, the content presentation 1, for example. So they would have to learn before they got into class. Okay, and in class they would do activities. Whereas in the in-class presentational, they didn't have homework the day before, and then they had the lesson 1 in the class 1. Okay, and then you can see how it goes, day 2 and day 3. So in the inverted classrooms, well, both of them, both inverted classroom and in-class presentational conditions, both use the same PowerPoint. Okay, the only difference is that the inverted classroom had 5 to 7 minutes of instructional video with guided practice. Okay, they had uh, Spanish and English glosses, and then um, and this would be for homework. So they would see these videos before they would come into class. And then the in-class presentational would use the same PowerPoint, but they would see it in class, and who would explain these grammar points would be the instructor. And the instructor had to explain these grammar points also between 5 to 7 minutes. So these are example slides from the grammar explanation. So as you can see, they had the explanation of the se impersonal first, and then they would have the practice. Okay, and they had Spanish and also English in them. For the homework, they would have a class practice activity, and then also conceptual questions that had been reviewed in class as part of the grammar explanation. Okay, so this would be depending if it was in class presentational or inverted class, how it would be used. So we already talked about how the classes were done and how what the homework was, but here you have a little more specified things that happen day to day. So, for example, how much homework the inverted class would have, and how much the in class presentational would have. And as you can see, there was much more homework, much more elements in the homework for the in class, inverted class room. And then during the class, they would have much more activities, okay, about it, and not, they wouldn't spend so much time in explaining the grammar point. Whereas in class presentational, they would have no homework before, but then in class they would have all the information about the grammar point, and for homework it was just a few things. So the data collection was divided in four. Okay, so we had the demographic and academic information and time spent on the most recent homework. So, for example, for the time spent, participants had to report the time that they had spent preparing for class the previous night. And then the second would be attitudinal inventory to measure variables of learners' affect, and then to measure the two types of second language knowledge, there was two different data collection. One was the usage description task assess metalinguistic knowledge, and then the grammatically judgment test measured explicit knowledge. The demographic, so I we already saw this table before, but I just wanted to show you. So the demographic and academic information and time spent is just to see who the participants were, um, and then the attitudinal variables to see their perceptions about the homework assignments on Spanish C. The way that they found it is they had four questions. One is how enjoyable learners found the assignments. Uh, Two, learners' comfort with the assignment structure. Three, learners' perceived confidence in their knowledge of material following the assignments. And four, the overall degree of which learners liked the assignments. For the usage description test, they had open-ended questions of second language knowledge, and what they did was students had to explain the Spanish passive and impersonal se in their own words. And then for the grammatically judgment test, so they had 34 Spanish questions. I'm giving you an example up here, say telling you so you can see kind of what they had to do. So they would have a sentence like se lleva pantalones cortos en el verano, and they would have to say how grammatically well formed does this sentence sound to you. So they would put one or six. One as in terrible, six as in perfect. And they also had the option to say I don't know. And then so students that didn't copy, there were two versions. Um, and the way they would answer is just pencil and paper. And these exams were anonymous, so you wouldn't know who the student is, who the student. Then there was a chapter test in which it was done after 2 or 3 days of the lesson. They had to write an original recipe with the passive se, and the way that it was graded is that if they used the correct use of impersonal se, they would get a point. The authors divided the findings or the results in the answering the three research questions. So the first question, just as a reminder, is there a difference in language learners' preference for inverted classroom versus in-class presentational assignments when being introduced to complex second language grammar structure? And so to find these results, they used a t-test. Okay, they conducted a t-test, and they found out that the inverted classroom sections had better attitude towards the homework assignment structure and the instructional model than the in-class presentational. There was also, it's important to know that only 94 out of 218 students answered the open-ended questions. For the findings of the question number 2, which is do other variables such as gender, academic program, or perceived similarity to previous instruction serve as moderators for foreign language learners reported preference for inverted classroom versus in-class in-class presentational presentational assignments. And for these results, they use regression analysis, and what they found is so female students in business did have lower attitude towards the instructional conditions. um, there was also a lot of students, most of the students in the in-class presentational, saying that they've had classes similar to that type of instruction before, more than the inverted classroom. And something else that was found is that the instructional condition and similarities do predict attitude scores. The findings for the question number 3, which is there a difference in learners' second language knowledge of a complex second language grammar structure following the inverted classrooms versus the in-class presential instruction? Okay, for these answers, they conducted a 4-way ANOVA, and they found out that both the inverted classroom and in-class presentational classes, they were equally, they performed equally, and there wasn't any significant difference. So the discussions, first I'm going to talk about the variables of effect. And one of the variables of effect was that learners in the inverted classroom condition had higher scores than those in the classroom presentational condition for every item on the inventory. The author say that it could be because of the low number of degrees of freedom, statistical power, associated with collapsing means at the course section level, and the comparable amount of negative and positive open-ended comments regarding the inverted classroom videos. They also talk about how the inverted classroom learners can pause, they can repeat, they can rewind the videos to better understand what the concept or the grammar structure. And they also talk about the women that were in business that had lower attitude. They also preferred the inverted classroom model. So, to assessing second language knowledge for the inverted classroom models, they were measuring 3 knowledge types. One was metalinguistic knowledge, explicit grammatic knowledge, and the third would be production knowledge. To measure the metalinguistic knowledge, they used the definition task, the one that they had to explain the grammar points of se with their own words. Then the explicit knowledge was measured with the grammatically judgment test, the one that they had a sentence and they had to say if that sentence was grammatically well formed or not. And then for the third, which is production knowledge, the participants had to write a recipe using Spanish se. The authors talk about the further research that could be done, and they say it would be useful to complement quantitative results with more qualitative data that could be collected via techniques such as post-treatment interviews with learners. And well, the critique of the study did answer the research questions. It answered all 3 of them. And I do agree with the limitations that the author mentioned. I think it is beneficial that that maybe in the inverted classes the students would only have the videos, the video conditions, instead of having videos and readings. But I think also that readings can also give you a better idea of what you are seeing in the video. So I do agree with part of it. And then possible problems of doing this study, or using this information for class, could be that the PowerPoint videos should be sufficient information about the grammar structures, um, for students to understand, and it might be hard for some students in inverted classrooms to learn alone. So they might have more questions, and there's no way for them to answer those questions until they get to their class, and it might be later. Some questions that could be asked after this study could be, um, so we already see that the inverted class model is liked, but I would like to see what kind of interactive application activities are the most beneficial after having the homework. So after students knowing the information of the grammar, and then and also, does inverted class models help second language learners understand grammar structures in a long term? So if this helps them, so in this study we see their how they feel about this, their attitude towards the inverted classes, and I would like to see also how the this inverted classes affect in long term. And so my references are here. The first one is the article, and then the additional sources were some that I read just to understand what I was reading, and then the images. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.